The swelling appeared on a Tuesday, a hard lump the size of a walnut buried deep in the flesh beneath his left arm. By Wednesday, it was the size of an egg. By Thursday, it was black, and it burned like someone had pressed a hot coal against his skin. By Friday, the man lying next to him on the floor of the parish church was dead. By Saturday, 3 more had joined him. But this man, this one unremarkable English peasant in the autumn of 1348, did not die. He survived. And what happened next was worse than the disease itself. Most people think the Black Death was a single event, a wave that came and went. But for the people who lived through it, the plague was not a moment. It was a season. It lasted months. In some places, it lasted over a year. And for those who survived, the dying did not end when the fever broke. It continued every single day, in every house, on every street, in every field left unharvested, and every church bell that would not stop ringing. Until one day, the bells stopped. Not because the dying was over, but because there was no one left to ring them. To understand what it meant to survive the Black Death, you first have to understand the world it destroyed. In the summer of 1348, England is a kingdom of roughly 5 million people. The villages are full, the fields are planted, the wool trade is booming. A peasant in a place like Dorset or Somerset lives a hard life, but a stable one. He works his strips of land. He pays his dues to the Lord. He goes to church on Sunday. His wife brews ale. His children chase geese through the yard. The harvest is coming in, and the weather has been fair. There are rumors, of course. Travelers speak of a terrible sickness in the south of France. Merchants returning from the continent whisper about entire cities emptied overnight. But England is an island. The sea has always been its shield. And besides, God would not allow such a thing to happen here. That is what they believe. That is what the priest tells them. And so they go about their lives, planting and reaping and praying, while somewhere in the hold of a ship docked at Melcombe Regis in Dorset, a rat scratches at a sack of grain. And on that rat, a flea carries a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. And that flea is about to change the course of human history. The chronicler at the Grey Friars of Lynn recorded the moment it began. In 1348, in Melcombe, in the county of Dorset, a little before the feast of St. John the Baptist, 2 ships came alongside, one of them from Bristol. One of the sailors had brought with him from Gascony the seeds of the terrible pestilence. Through him, the men of that town were the first in England to be infected. It moved fast. Within weeks, it had reached Bristol, the second largest city in England. The chronicler Henry Knighton wrote that almost the whole strength of the town perished. Few kept their beds more than 2 or 3 days, or even half a day. By September, it was in London. By spring of the following year, it was everywhere. The disease presented itself in ways that no one had ever seen. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who survived the plague in Florence, described the symptoms in horrifying detail. It began with swellings in the groin or under the armpit. They grew to the size of a small apple or an egg. They were called tumors. In a short space of time, these tumors spread all over the body. Then came the black or purple spots on the arms, the thighs, any part of the body. Sometimes a few large ones, sometimes many little ones. These spots were a certain sign of death. Now imagine you are lying on a straw pallet in a darkened room. Your skin is on fire. The swelling under your arm has grown so large that you cannot lower your arm to your side. It throbs with every heartbeat. The pain is unlike anything you have ever felt. A deep, grinding pressure, as if something alive is growing inside you. Your mouth is dry. Your tongue is swollen. The room smells of vinegar and smoke because someone has tried the only remedies anyone knows: burning herbs, pouring vinegar on cloth, pressing a poultice of crushed garlic against the swelling. None of it works. You know this because the woman who was lying beside you yesterday is now being carried out through the door, wrapped in a sheet that is already stained dark. But then something happens that no one expects. The bubo bursts. The swelling that has been growing for days suddenly ruptures, and a foul, dark fluid drains from the wound. The pain does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes a dull ache instead of a scream. The fever begins to break. You are drenched in sweat. You are shaking, but you are alive. You are one of the very few. In most villages, the survival rate for those who develop buboes is less than 1 in 3. For those who catch the pneumonic form, the kind that attacks the lungs and spreads through the air, it is almost 0. You survive, but you wake up to a world that no longer exists. The first thing you notice is the silence. The village that was once full of voices, children shouting, dogs barking, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, is quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. You walk outside and the street is deserted. Doors hang open. A pig wanders through a yard where no one comes to feed it. The smell hits you before you see the source. It is the smell of decay, thick and sweet and inescapable. There are bodies, not in the churchyard, in the houses, in the lanes, wrapped in sheets or not wrapped at all. Some have been there for days. The social fabric that held everything together has been ripped apart. Boccaccio wrote that brother abandoned brother, and the uncle his nephew, and the sister her brother, and very often the wife her husband. What is even worse and nearly incredible is that fathers and mothers refuse to see and tend their children as if they had not been theirs. This was not cruelty, this was terror. People understood, even without knowing the science, that to touch the sick was to become sick. And so they ran. They ran from their own families. In Siena, a man named Agnolo di Tura, a city chronicler, left behind words that have echoed across 7 centuries. And I, Agnolo di Tura, called the fat, buried my 5 children with my own hands. He did not write this as literature. He wrote it as fact. 5 children, his own hands. The gravediggers were dead. The priests were dead. There was no one left to perform the rituals that were supposed to give death its meaning. And so a father dug 5 small holes in the earth and placed his children in them, one by one, and covered them with dirt. And there were also those, he continued, who were so sparsely covered with earth that the dogs dragged them forth and devoured many bodies throughout the city. For the survivors, daily life became something unrecognizable. The fields went unplowed because there were no laborers. The livestock wandered free because there were no herders. The mills stood silent because there were no millers. In London, more than 200 corpses were buried every single day between February and April of 1349. The king himself wrote to the city council demanding they clean the streets. The council wrote back and said they could not because all of the street cleaners were dead. The church, which had been the bedrock of medieval life, began to crack. Priests died at even higher rates than lay people because they were the ones called to administer last rites, to sit beside the dying, to touch the sick. In some parishes, every single priest was dead within months. The people who survived began to ask a question that had never been asked before. If God is good and God is powerful, then why did he allow this? The church had no answer. And in that silence, something shifted in the European mind that would never shift back. At the Church of St. Mary in Ashwell, Hertfordshire, someone carved an inscription into the stone wall. It is still there today. It reads, "Wretched, terrible, destructive year, the remnants of the people alone remain." That is not a chronicle. That is not a record. That is a scream, carved into rock by someone who had no other way to be heard. When the plague finally loosened its grip, sometime around 1351, the numbers were staggering. Across Europe, somewhere between 25 and 50 million people were dead. In England alone, the population fell from roughly 5 million to under 3 million. Entire villages were abandoned. At Warham Percy in Yorkshire, the cottages stood empty, their doors left open, their gardens overgrown. The crops rotted in the fields. The sheep grazed where no shepherd came to count them. But here is the part that history rarely tells. The survivors did not simply mourn, they adapted. With so few workers left, the peasants who remained could suddenly demand something that had been unthinkable before the plague. Higher wages, better conditions, the right to move freely from one manor to another. The feudal system, which had locked them to the land for generations, began to collapse under the weight of its own irrelevance. A lord with no tenants is not a lord. A field with no workers is just grass. The Black Death did not just kill half of Europe, it killed the old world. And from the bones and the ash and the empty villages, a new one began to grow. Agnolo di Tura ended his chronicle with a single line. There was no one who wept for any death, for all awaited death. And so it is said that the end of the world has come. But the end of the world did not come. The world continued. It continued with fewer people, with deeper scars, with questions that had no answers. It continued because a man in a darkened room felt a swelling burst beneath his arm, and he did not die. He stood up. He walked outside into the silence, and he began again.